My, sir. You've never used them before.
Lamb, released in 2021, written and directed by Valdemar Johansen and co-written by poet and lyricist Joan, is a story about a husband and wife who raise sheep and horses on an isolated farm in rural Iceland. The original title, Dýrið, which means the beast, gives perhaps a glimpse into this film's obscure narrative. Lamb shares the minimalist, art house, Dogma 95 aesthetic, made famous by director and screenwriter Lars von Trier, and adds another heathen-inspired presentation in the newly resurrected folk horror genre that first emerged during the counterculture and New Age movements of the 1960s and 1970s. With British films like the original The Wicker Man, released in 1973, or The Blood on Satan's Claw, released in 1971, the genre intended to invoke fear in its audience using elements of isolation, religion, and the power of nature in a rural farmland setting at the hands of people with a dramatically different worldview and their behavior against the ones who attempted to come against them. The A24 catalog includes films like The Witch, Ari Aster's Midsommar, and now Lamb, adding another interesting fable with a twisted Yuletide, or should I say, Christmas tale. What distinguishes pagan-inspired folktales like Lamb with Pan the goat god, or The Witch with Black Phillip, or Midsommar's death cult fertility rituals from standard-issue satanic Hollywood fare that engages in its long tradition of sorcery, counterculture rebellion, pop culture occultism and witchcraft, and the relentless bashing of the Christian faith? Nothing. The heathen traditions are rich with stories that have been passed down through many cultures for centuries, and nary a one even put Christian doctrine into their vocabulary. The most telling of the nature of this film is that it gives careful attention to mock the Christian faith and its body of believers, all while glorifying the devil. Appealing to deep-seated emotions, it extracts and rises to your conscious awareness strong, profound feelings you probably weren't aware you even had, while seducing you with breathtaking cinematics and deeply moving human sentiments that leave a lasting impact on your psyche. The story begins with a dark and dreadful winter landscape. A heavy-breathing unknown entity approaches a small herd of horses who become spooked and run in the other direction as the entity continues to approach the couple's farm, arriving at their barn. Selecting one perfect sheep, the entity mates with it, impregnating her as the radio announces it is Christmas night. Christmas hymns continue to play as Maria, inside her home, serves roast lamb for their Christmas dinner. Months later, which puts it to about May or midsummer, Maria and Ingvar realize she is ready to give birth and they assist her. They're surprised to discover she has given birth to a lamb-human hybrid, which incidentally is barely noticeable by their expression, as they show almost no shock or surprise, which makes this seem like a very easy course of events for these people. They decide to adopt this mysterious creature as their own and bring it into their home. The couple had already lost a child, we don't know when or how. They've continued on in their grieving, tending to their farm, their marriage. Nature has provided a gift, they must think, and they make the hybrid their own to be raised as a human child. Their child that died was named Ada, and they give the same name to the lamb child as if they have made it a perfect substitute or some strange clone to the child they had lost, adding another unsettling element to the tale. They grow to deeply love the hybrid lamb, bringing much-needed happiness and relief to their grieving. Maria begins to come back to life herself, beginning to smile again, giving her life meaning and happiness. Ada's biological mother continues to bleat and cry for her baby lamb outside the couple's home. Maria grows annoyed at the constant reminder that the child is not her own and decides to kill her mother and bury her in a shallow, unmarked grave. Maria doesn't realize that Ingvar's brother had watched the whole scene, Pieter, who has not yet announced he's returned for a visit. Pieter seems to be not entirely of upstanding character. He's disturbed by Ada and the couple's creepy attachment to it. It's an animal, not a child, he insists, as he offers her a handful of grass, while Ada crouches down on all fours to receive it. Pieter takes her out to a field early one morning while everyone sleeps, with the intent to shoot her as he sees her as an abomination that must be destroyed. But he's unable to go through with it and is seen later cuddling with her while sleeping in a chair, and then becoming a loving uncle-like figure from that point forward. While having a drunken party and watching a sports match on television, it's clear that the lamb part of Ada is very active in her personality. Perhaps this will never leave her, it's in her nature. The loud noise and unpredictable behavior of the adults is startling her, making her tense, so she wanders outside where she encounters the unknown entity, her biological father, standing before her near the barn. As Ingvar is put to bed drunk, and then Pieter makes some unwanted advances on Maria, which she refuses, and then sends him away on a bus the next morning, she returns to the farm to find her husband has been killed and Ada has gone missing. Ingvar had been confronted by the unknown entity, who has returned for his daughter to take her back with him to the wild. He has taken back what belongs to him. Nature takes retribution for those who try to take from it what doesn't belong to them. Maria, now alone and has lost everyone, realizes the consequences of her actions as well as her fate, which she instinctually knew all along that it was only a matter of time before she would have to pay for her choices. And credits roll. Points of interest in this film. A couple of little tidbits. First, if you look at the pictures on the fridge, there's an image of a hand with a nail hole pierced through it. Below that, there's an image of a man crawling on all fours with the head of a ram. This film continues to combine the Christian element with a pagan one. This film begins dead center of the winter solstice, with a dreadful and dark winter scene. This was also the somber opening to Ari Aster's Midsommar, which the director claims offered a stark contrast between the devastation of Dani and the death of her entire family to the sunny and bright atmosphere of the Horga commune. Yule, in the ancient pagan tradition, or Saturnalia from ancient Rome, references the time of the waxing of the sun. It represents the eternal cycle between death and rebirth, the battle between light and darkness. If you're a farmer in rural Iceland, which is near the Arctic Circle, who lives through 6 months of night during winter months, this darkness can feel long and oppressive. According to the tradition, this is the time of reverence for the underworld, the warding off of spirits, and the honoring of the rebirth of the sun god who retreats during this time only to return in the spring. Saturnalia honors the primordial pagan god Saturn, or Cronus from the Greek. Saturn presided over agriculture, the harvest, and time. The holiday is considered the birthday of the unconquered sun, with Saturn's reign being considered the golden age of abundance and peace by many Roman authors. During this time, everyone was considered equal. Caste systems were set aside, roles of master and slave reversed, and people had all they needed in abundance without having to labor and struggle for it. Saturn holds a sickle in his left hand and a bundle of wheat in his right. The sickle represents the harvest of the life-sustaining food staple, wheat. It represents immortality, or more specifically, the continuance of the human race. It is this pagan god symbol for which we get this symbol. During Saturnalia, moral restrictions were removed, rules of manners and etiquette ignored, and immorality encouraged. These primordial gods were believed to be the first inhabitants of the world. They were very large and man-like, but without human qualities. In other words, they were non-human giants. The descendants of these primordial gods were the Titans, a striking parallel to the Watchers and the Nephilim we understood from the book of Genesis in the Bible. But Johansen is not telling a tale of ancient pagan mythos per se. He's posing this as a Christmas story, one in which a faun, Pan, the pagan god of the wild, mates with an unblemished lamb on Christmas to create a hybrid, rather cruelly, to a farming couple that recently lost their human child. Pan is typically portrayed as half-goat. Why does this director choose a ram instead? My first guess was that for this twisted Christmas tale, the lamb makes for better symbolism and greater mockery. Jesus, the Son of God, was the Lamb that was slain who took away the sins of the world, and for which his birthday is celebrated on Christmas. The irony is not lost on the fact that Christmas is believed to be celebrated on this pagan holiday thanks to Roman Emperor Constantine, which included other winter solstice rituals such as the lighting of the Yule log and decorations with evergreens by Germanic pagan tribes. This lamb hybrid child becomes this counterfeit messianic Christ figure, the sacred lamb, so to speak, offspring of this resurrected ancient nature god represented by the devil himself, that will usher in the new age with a brand new species, a lamb, one that is female, to further abolish the patriarchy and glorify the feminine. It's interesting that Maria exhorts to Pietro that Ada represents a new beginning. It's clear in this story that Maria and Ingvar are Christians, but they are being portrayed here as being so blatantly oppressive in their entitlement to the natural world. Top of the food chain, they raise sheep, they eat sheep at every meal, even on Christmas night. She serves up a lamb roast for the holiday meal. Philosopher Immanuel Kant wrote, "When man first said to the sheep, 'The pelt which you wear was given to you by nature not for your own use, but for mine,' and took it from the sheep to wear it himself, he became aware of a prerogative which he enjoyed over all the animals, and he now no longer regarded them as fellow creatures, but as means and instruments to be used at will for the attainment of whatever ends he pleased." Kant didn't mean that as a compliment, and neither does Johansen. Maria and Ingvar are being portrayed as a couple who operate from this distorted idea of the Christian worldview. So therefore, they are selfish, oppressive takers. They have their own private farm with their own animals, foraging their own lives for themselves. How dare they? What monsters. The idea that Christians do not respect or care for nature and the environment is just blatantly false and comes from a certain group that would like to see Christianity erased from the face of the earth. More about that in a bit. Is it just me, or do these doors and windows look like something out of the book of Exodus? Interestingly, Ada, a Germanic name, means ornament, but it also means noble or of nobility. Maria, the mother's name, is derived from the ancient Hebrew name Miriam, meaning beloved, bitter, or rebellious, a reference to Miriam's bitter life as an Egyptian slave. Perhaps Johansen is suggesting that Maria is a slave to her Christian worldview. I'm sure it's no coincidence that she shares the name of the mother of Jesus, who in this story feels selfishly entitled to be the mother of this gift from the nature gods, to satisfy her own desires and to heal her wounds. Here, Maria honors the lamb with a crown of hand-picked flowers, woven into the circle of eternal life, honoring her as the Queen of Spring, the May Queen. The first Ada found in the Bible is the wife of Lamech, found in Genesis chapter 4, who was a Hittite and the mother of Jabal and Jubal. There were giants among the Hittites. Lamech was a descendant of Cain. Cain, incidentally, was a tiller of the soil, meaning he grew vegetables. His brother Abel raised sheep. Cain murdered his brother who raised sheep because God rejected Cain's offerings. Modern illuminists like to twist this to mean that the cruel, tyrannical, evil God rejected Cain's offerings because vegetables and herbs were the better food for humans, which do not require the exploitation and slaughter of animals, and Abel's offering was accepted because, meat and exploitation of nature and dead animals, and that's terrible for humanity and very selfish and very evil. Therefore, God is terrible for humanity and also very selfish and very evil. What they refuse to acknowledge is that it wasn't about the vegetables or the meat at all. It was about the attitude behind the offering. Abel gave the very best of his flock to God right off the top, with a glad heart. Cain just took some portion of his crops to give his obligatory offering, and his heart wasn't in it. Of Ada's two sons, Jabal was the father of, or the ancestor of, all who raise livestock, and Jubal, the father of, or the ancestor of, all who play the lyre in the pipe, more specifically, Pan's pipe. Ingvar in this story raises livestock. His brother is a musician. Okay, maybe that's a stretch, but I think it's worth mentioning. The second Ada found in the Bible is the wife of Esau, the man who traded his birthright for a bowl of stew, found in Genesis chapter 36. Ada and Esau's other wives were Canaanites, which brought great distress to Isaac and Rebekah, Esau's parents. Not only were the Canaanites and the Hittites giant clans, but Ada and Esau's other wives introduced pagan practices and idolatry into the family. Jacob, Isaac and Rebekah's other son, did not marry into the Canaanite tribes, but took a wife from their own people. He then became the father of the 12 tribes of Israel, found in Genesis chapter 35. Ada represents corrupted human DNA through hybridized offspring of the Watchers and the Nephilim. She represents pagan idolatry and practices. She represents worldliness and contamination through wickedness. It was the Watchers who brought pagan practices to mankind in the first place, specifically to women. The Book of Watchers, the Enochian text, and the Book of Jubilees interpret the biblical story of the sins of the sons of God, or the Watchers, to include teaching women the transmission of knowledge forbidden to human beings. In particular, the Watchers teach women the heavenly mysteries of sorcery and spells, among them methods of divination by the observance of heavenly and earthly phenomena, in other words, astrology. These, however, are not the true secrets of heaven. They are the rejected mysteries, which the Watchers ought not to have taught human beings, because they're so destructive, and which was revealed by Enoch, who was taken up and shown the truth, found in Genesis chapter 5. In Genesis chapter 6, verses 1 through 4, it reveals the role of women as the link between earth and the divine, between gods and humanity. The daughters of men are at the central point between human men and the sons of God. They became the mediators who provided a reproductive link between humanity created by God and the corruption of human DNA by the Watchers to the bloodline that would eventually give birth to the Savior. The sons of God take the women from men, and they became the women whom the sons chose and then cohabited with. Despite their central position, these chosen women did not act on their own behalf or were put in any high divine position. The sons of God choose, take, and cohabit with them to be sexual partners of the Watchers, mothers of the destructive giants, and recipients of the rejected mysteries. Rejected mysteries is another way of saying garbage information. And to whom did they give birth? The Nephilim, the mighty men of renown, who were perhaps renowned because their fathers were divine beings. Sorcery and divination were not the only magical arts taught by the Watchers. They also taught the dividing of roots and herbs, which had nothing to do with gardening, by the way. It was the making of intoxicants, pharmakeia, to expand their consciousness, to incant, invoke, and channel other spirits. They were taught the craft of metallurgy and weapons making, cosmetics and dyeing of fabrics, jewelry making with precious jewels, and the making of mirrors. They were taught theater arts. They were taught sophistry, which is the art of deception. It's an art form. It's the deliberate use of fallacious, false, or duplicitous statements with the intent to trick or deceive someone. When you see modern-day neo-pagans glorifying themselves as powerful beings, empowered with secret knowledge and magical powers, but cry, oppression, oppression, because God forbids them to be who they really are, remember, they were meaningless dupes who were given garbage information so they could be baby factories for destructive giants, and they were offered zero in return for their sacrifices. In A24's The Witch, the witches who live in the wood capture the children of a Puritan pilgrim family to grind them up and eat them and then cover themselves with their blood for the purpose of doing rituals. They're given offers by the devil himself to live deliciously in exchange for signing their name in his book.
Wouldst thou like the taste of butter, a pretty dress? Wouldst thou like to live deliciously?
Jex Blackmore, national spokesperson for the Satanic Temple, had this to say.
The witch was kind of the handmaiden of Satan. It took a life of its own because it's really the manifestation of evil in female form. The fear of witches and of the influence of the devil came from Europe and hundreds of years of perpetuating this mythology about satanic influence. The influence of Satan and the satanic influence on women and on colonies was part of what kind of held the religious structure together. And people suffered greatly as a result of it. The witch idea deserves more consideration because of the history and the evolution in American thought of the witch being dangerous. It is my hope that we can encourage people to see this film and really undergo a transformation and inspire a satanic experience.
All of the hybrid human-giant clans, otherwise known as the Nephilim or the Anakim, would go on to become the Emim, the Raphaim, the Zanzumim, the Amorites, Amalekites, Hittites, Jebusites, Canaanites, and Philistines, revealing that not every giant clan was eradicated during the flood. Enoch, the book that was quoted by Jesus himself in John chapter 5 and Matthew 19 and other places, denounced the fallen angels with these words, "You have been in heaven, but all the mysteries had not yet been revealed to you, and you knew worthless ones. And these, in the hardness of your hearts, you have made known to the women, and through these mysteries women and men work much evil on the earth." But all that aside, why in the world would this director choose a lamb for this character in the story? Pan is traditionally known to be half man, half goat. Obviously, it's important to get the perspective of the speaker, the ones communicating, which in this case are the writers and the director of the story, as well as the distribution company that makes sure it gets out to the world. While Valdemar Johansen, by the industry, is considered a rookie director, he also incidentally worked as a tech on the set of Ridley Scott's film Prometheus. He's on his way. He said in an interview that he just started writing sketches of the Lamb hybrid, claims he's not sure exactly where the idea came from specifically. He said, "It's hard to say where ideas come from. They are all around, everywhere, and always." Dare I suggest that Johansen's ideas come from being surrounded with these concepts from like-minded colleagues in the field? He continues, "Before we started writing the script, I almost just came up with a mood, because the story was not there, but I knew what kind of mood I wanted to have, and sometimes we even wrote some scenes around some image or some painting." Co-writer Joan, a poet and lyricist, co-founded the neo-surrealist bohemian group Medusa back in 1979, of which he believed then was a vehicle that could, quote-unquote, change the world. His mentors are writers and lyricists like William S. Burroughs and David Bowie, and he was part of the culture scene in Iceland during the counterculture era. He currently sits as president of the Icelandic Pen Center, which is an international foundation committed to promoting literature and defending freedom of expression, more specifically, postmodern communist writers. Joan will not be there to help you, dear Christian, if you are persecuted for writing biblical content in, say, a communist country. Joan is also former chairman of the board of the Reykjavik UNESCO City of Literature. From their website, quote, "Created in 2004, the UNESCO Creative Cities Network, or UCCN, gathers 246 cities worldwide that have recognized culture and creativity as strategic enablers for the achievement of sustainable urban development under the 2030 Agenda," end quote. Sounds to me like a fancy way of saying they network with a group of creators worldwide to make sophisticated propaganda that furthers the vision of sustainable development under the 2030 Agenda. And then there's A24, an American independent entertainment company that was founded in 2012 by these three guys. They specialize in film and television distribution and production. While they present as a hipster, art house, indie startup, this is hardly the case. These three men are veterans in the film production and distribution industry. Their focus is on films and shows that, in their own words, believe that, quote, "people will pay to see movies with a distinct point of view," end quote. In the words of a New York Times article, A24 has delivered one cultural thunderclap after another. Katz, prior to A24, led the film finance group at Guggenheim Partners, an enormous investment and asset managing banking service headquartered in New York City and Chicago, where partner Fenkel was the president. Guggenheim Partners has more than $325 billion of assets under its management and have provided the seed money for A24. In other words, big bankers Guggenheim Partners funded the operation and own a significant stake in the company. So back to the RAM, what's the deal? To understand this, you have to think like an illuminist ideologue. Remember that golden age I mentioned earlier that's celebrated during Saturnalia? The one that sounds like the dialectic in its embryo stage of global communism under an elite oligarchical rule? Well, Plato wrote about that in The Statesman. In Plato's Statesman, to rule or have political power meant having specialized knowledge. The statesman is the one who has obtained this specialized knowledge of how to rule justly. Plato concludes that government should be run by those who have this special knowledge, or gnosis. The statesman becomes the philosopher king, the good shepherd. In the case of Lamb, nature is the ultimate governor, likened to a god. The philosopher king who has obtained gnosis is the steward of this nature god. Average, everyday humans and the natural order are below the philosopher king, obligated and bound to serve nature. And here, nature is represented by the devil himself. Leviticus 17:7 tells us that the Israelites were making sacrifices to satyrs, half-man, half-goat beings, that some translations refer to as devils or demons. These creatures have been linked to the Greek god Pan and the goat of Mendes. Looking in the Strong's Concordance, goat idols is the word sair, which is a word that can be used as either an adjective, as in a hairy person, or a noun, as in a he-goat or a buck, a sacrificial animal, or a satyr, referring to a demon-possessed goat, like the swine of Gadara. So depending on the usage in the verse and its context, this word can mean simply to describe a hairy person, an actual goat, a sacrificial goat, a goat idol, or a demon. Out of all these verses that use the term satyr, some of them, as in Isaiah, 2 Chronicles, Leviticus, and 2 Kings, refer to the satyr as a hairy demon that lived in the wild, in the wood, in the desert, and in desolate ruins, and who cry out and dance. Of course, the verses that refer to the satyr as a demon or an idol of a demon was during the time of hundreds of years of vile, wicked, conquering kings who engaged in various disgusting and alien practices. It was the time of the destruction of Solomon's temple, then Babylonian captivity, and of which their pagan gods hearkened back to Egyptian gods. The Egyptians, the Assyrians, Babylonians, Persians, Greeks, and the Egyptians again, and the Roman Empire would all have their turn running the show, and their gods, for the most part, started in Egypt. And the satyr in Egypt was originally half man, half ram, the god of fertility and procreation, and was worshipped from the first dynasty into the early centuries AD. One of the primordial gods in the pantheon, he was represented as a ram with horizontal twisting horns, or as a man with a ram's head. He was portrayed as a builder of temples and was believed to be a creator of demigods, humans, and animals, enacting his creation on a potter's wheel. For thousands of years, the mystery schools from ancient Egypt, Babylon, Persia, Greece, Rome, and the Near East, all rooted in the rejected mysteries of the Watchers, have been considered the ultimate authority in secret wisdom and knowledge of Gnosis and its gods. These great teachers who officiated over the mystery schools, sometimes referred to as the divine sciences, must have been great wise masters who may have come from some otherworldly place, beings that predate and have survived the great deluge, and made their way to the early civilization of Egypt, advancing it far above all other cultures of that era. The first initiate of these ancient teachings was known as Thoth, and to the Greeks as Hermes. The combining of these two entities, Hermes Trismegistus, is the originator, the initiator, the high priest of a powerful system of magic, and the repository of this ancient wisdom. Hermes Trismegistus, or Mercury to the Romans, delivers divine knowledge to carefully selected mortals who have been initiated into these transcendent mysteries. The initiates of the mystery schools, in order to attain the mastery demanded by the priests, students would undergo a rigorous restructuring of their physical, moral, and spiritual being. Only by developing one's will, intuition, and reason to an extraordinary degree could one obtain access to the hidden forces in the universe and themselves become a hierophant, a seer, a magician, or an initiator. It is Hermes Trismegistus that is credited for originating all the material contained in the 42 books of esoteric science. And it's the high-ranking Freemasons who believe themselves the successor of these mysteries, its new masters and high priests. Freemasonry, which is an occultic order, is about veiling the mysteries in alchemical, hermetic, allegorical images. It's mystical symbols of imaginary deities with human passions, appetites, and lusts, to illustrate what was difficult to explain, but also to excite a feeling, a mood, while not being so obvious that the obtuse could understand. To put it quite simply, it's the making of idols. These occultists know that they're not real, but just as the Israelites formed a golden calf while Moses was on the mountain, the Masons fashion idols, not to be worshipped as any real deity, but an alchemical concept to incite a mood and to model themselves after, to fulfill any variety of transcendental purposes, particularly in the realms of industry, wealth, science, and politics. The Mason seeks power, even the power to control the forces of nature. Freemason and Luciferian Albert Pike, in his book Morals and Dogma, wrote, "Masonry is identical to the ancient mysteries." Freemasons worship Lucifer, the light bearer, and from the very first initiation are urged to mightily seek the light. Interestingly, the ram man evolved into the goat man, probably because that particular species of wild Barbary sheep went extinct in that region of Egypt. Pan the goat god, son of Hermes Trismegistus, was resurrected in Masonry as the Baphomet, an encapsulation of several representations of the occultic, pantheistic god of forces. Containing binary elements, it's the symbolization of the equilibrium of opposites. It's the dual forces of male and female, good and evil, positive and negative aspects of nature, darkness and light, working together as one. The ram god is the goat god. The goat god is Pan. He is Dionysus. He is a symbolic entity that the adept uses to further their transhumanist satanic evolution into gods themselves and to bring about what they believe is a perfect social order. 19th century French occultist Eliphas Levi, who first illustrated the idol of the Baphomet in his book Dogme rituel de la haute magie, describes each aspect of the symbolism used. the pentagram, the male and female arms, the hand sign of Hermeticism, the goat, the phallic caduceus, and the feminine breasts combine to represent the light of Lucifer, Hermeticism, the alchemical equilibrium of male and female energy, the lusty carnal goat, the secret knowledge or gnosis, eternal life, and the occult sciences. It was Albert Pike who linked the Baphomet to the goat of Mendes. The Baphomet would become a central figure within the cosmology of Thelema, a mystical system of magical rituals established by Freemason and occultist Aleister Crowley in the early 20th century. Crowley wrote Thegnostic Mass in 1913 while traveling in Moscow, Russia, a few short years before the Bolshevik Revolution. His Gnostic Mass was deliberately modeled after the Mass of both the Roman Catholic and Eastern Orthodox churches, but replaced their doctrinal principles with the principles of Thelema. It was the central rite and ritual of the Ordo Templi Orientis. The ritual concludes with the consummation of a Eucharist that included a goblet of wine and the cake of light, which contained flour, honey, olive oil, ash, and male and female bodily fluids. Part of the Gnostic Mass, Crowley recited the words, quote, "And I believe in the serpent and the lion, mystery of mysteries, in his name, Baphomet," end quote. Fast forward a few decades to Anton Szandor LaVey as part of the 1960s counterculture rebellion, and his fascination and experimentation with Western esotericism founded the Church of Satan in San Francisco in 1966. LaVey clearly states in his book that the Baphomet was idolized as a symbol of Satan, but he does not recognize Satan as an anthropomorphic being, but a symbol representing a force of nature. Like Crowley, LaVey utilized several rituals of which the person performing the ritual would stand facing the altar, and a symbol of Baphomet. What is of utmost importance is realizing that none of these people I've mentioned believe in Satan to be a real entity. They do not believe in God or the devil.
In the mystery schools, they refer to this mystical time coming out of the age of innocence as the Luciferian philosophy. There's only one difference between the Luciferian philosophy and the fall of man, is that those who talk about the fall of man believe in God. The ones who believe in the Luciferian philosophy do not. God had commanded Adam and Eve not to eat of the fruit of that tree. If you do, ye will surely die. Isn't that the commandment? Lucifer, through his agent Satan, on the other hand, told Eve, God lied to you. He's holding back the fact that you too can become God. But first you have to eat of the fruit of this tree. And if you do, you will surely not die, but shall become as gods. Mysteries, on the other hand, look at this in a different light. Here's their story. It's a metaphor. They don't believe that there ever was a God, or that there ever is a God, aside from man himself. And man has not reached that state yet, but can, and this is what they teach in the lodges, that if you perfect yourself as the temple of the God within and become Christed, you've all heard this in the New Age movement, you too can become God. In a movie, running on the beach, spinning around, I am God. Adam and Eve were held prisoner in the Garden of Eden by an unjust, cruel, and vindictive God until Lucifer, through his agent Satan, set man free from this garden by giving him the gift of intellect. Through the use of intellect, man will conquer the earth, will conquer nature, and will himself become God. It's taught in every Masonic temple in this land, every secret brotherhood, every secret society, every mystical temple, every occult organization teaches the Luciferian philosophy.
These rituals are meant to reframe the consciousness of the individual. It has no connection to worshiping the actual Satan. LaVey explains that, quote, anything which serves to intensify the emotions during a ritual will contribute to its success. The Baphomet placed in the line of sight will function as an indisputable symbol of the original rebel, Satan, during the ceremony, and it will work as a constant reminder of the purpose of the ritual, and to make sure that the Satanist doesn't give in to any intellectual thinking, but rather maintains focus on his or her emotions and the carnal simplicity found in the symbol, end quote. Satanism, to LaVey, represents the carnal instincts of man, and the inverted pentagram represents man's material nature. He is not a spiritual being, he is carnal, like an animal. They don't worship Satan, they want to be Satan. They want to harness the power of Satan in themselves. Crowley wrote in Magic, Book 4, quote, "The devil does not exist. The devil is historically the god of any people that one personally dislikes. The serpent, Satan, is not the enemy of man, but he who made gods of our race, knowing good and evil, he bade know thyself and taught initiation." End quote. Crowley also explained in his book Confessions, which details why he wrote the Gnostic Mass, quote, "Human nature demands, in the case of most people, the satisfaction of the religious instinct, and to very many, this may best be done by ceremonial means. I wish, therefore, to construct a ritual through which people might enter into ecstasy, as they have always done under the influence of appropriate ritual. I resolved that my ritual should celebrate the sublimity of the operation of universal forces without introducing disputable metaphysical theories. I would neither make nor imply any statement about nature which would not be endorsed by the most materialistic man of science." The film Lamb, if I were to summarize my analysis, is a Luciferian story with heavy Masonic leanings, to further an atheistic, transhumanist notion of a species for a new eon. It's a subtle narrative, one that reflects in folkloric fashion an idea for them that Christianity is dead and to be replaced by Gaia worship, and her doctrine of a sustainable future crafted by the philosopher kings. The hybrid lamb represents that a new species of humanity has now been born. This new humanity recognizes its new God, a force of nature, who is the devil himself.